and Moto back this week for another review, and yes, it's a sports game again. Hey, at least it's not another Sesame Street game this week, right? Well, actually, yeah, but that's going to spoil things. I promise. I'm trying to space these out. There's just a lot of sports titles. And the start of the NBA preseason seemed like a good time to start on the Sega produced series of basketball titles, which would end up being Electronic Arts' main competition. Even though what would turn into an NBA action series didn't really make a dent and would eventually be canceled. But this review isn't about those games. It's about a game that, if anything, has more in common with a previously reviewed Basketball Nightmare for the Master System. And if you want more information about that wacky title, go check out episode 8. This week, we're taking on one of the seminal Genesis sports titles, Pat Riley Basketball. Pat Riley Basketball, or Super Real Basketball as it's known everywhere else besides the US, who might not have known who Pat Riley is, was released in August 1990, hitting the market a few months before the 1990 NBA season would begin, and also beating Electronic Arts' Lakers vs. Celtics to the punch as the basketball title for the Genesis, as it wouldn't release until December. If you'd like to know more about that game, go check out Zilog and Moto episode number 12. So let's say you're not an NBA superfan and you don't know who Pat Riley is or why he has a basketball game named after him. Well, I'll explain. Pat Riley is a former NBA player who played for the Rockets, Suns, and Lakers before eventually becoming an assistant and later head coach for the Lakers in the 80s. Riley led the Showtime era Lakers to 5 championships and by the end of the decade had become one of the most popular basketball coaches of all time. Riley would go on to coach the New York Knicks in the 90s and then served as both coach and team president of the Miami Heat in the 2000s, ultimately being involved in 3 more championships over the last 15 years. Early in the Genesis lifespan, Sega decided to really make a splash for the American people. They would have a whole series of sports games that were endorsed by either famous athletes or coaches or managers. This includes the likes of Tommy Lasorda baseball, Mario Lemieux hockey, Evander Holyfield boxing, Arnold Palmer golf, and probably the most famous of these series, Joe Montana football, which we covered back in episode 27. Now, I can't speak as to why Sega specifically chose Pat Riley instead of, say, Magic Johnson or Charles Barkley, other than the fact I'm guessing the difference in money that Pat would acquire for the deal was probably a fraction of what a high-caliber athlete would have cost him, while still getting similar name recognition. As we found in the Joe Montana football review I just referred to, Sega found a nice bit of success with that title and were able to create a long-running franchise that had releases on multiple consoles, due to it being a pretty fun game that had some replayability. Is that the case with Pat Riley Basketball? Well, that's getting ahead of things, but let's just say there's a reason why the game never had a true sequel, and its planned port for the Master System was eventually canceled. Let's take a look at the box. Here's Pat Riley Basketball, and as it was released in mid-1990, features the classic black Genesis background with cross-hatching. I'm sure I've said this before, but I really like these early covers. It's just a very sharp layout and certainly a lot better than the later color-coded red labels. The picture on the cover is weirdly not centered, being over to the left for some reason. You can see it's very slim here and very wide over there. Not a big deal, but I'm sure it might annoy some obsessive compulsives out there. If you look very closely at the background, you can tell it's definitely a picture of the Lakers, seeing these uniforms here, playing some other team in white uniforms, which you really can't tell. There's one guy right there, and then there's another guy at the back here. It could be the Celtics, but it could also be pretty much anybody. It's indistinct enough that no one could claim trademark infringement. In front of that is a still somewhat youthful-looking Pat superimposed on the cover above his signature and title at the bottom. You probably figured that having a signature in purple instead of blue might have caused a bit of a trademark issue with the yellow in the basketball. But I can guarantee that having the yellow on that basketball there was definitely a strategic choice. Now, flipping over the back, the rear cover is centered much better. You can tell it's got the same amount of size on both sides. So, yeah, that front design just seems like a weird aberration. There's 3 good quality screenshots here. A larger one here, and then 2 smaller ones down here. And the larger one
being a player conspicuously wearing a yellow uniform, slam dunking the ball. One thing I'd like to point out about the screenshots, though, is if you notice, none of them actually showcase gameplay footage. The middle one shows tournament bracket. You can barely see that there. Let me see if I can get that as close as I can up to there. But the other two are from dunk scenes, and while those technically appear as, in game, it's not gameplay. It seems a little odd that they wouldn't represent what the game actually looks like when you're playing it and moving your character about on the screen, but I don't know. More about that later. Beside the screenshots, the rear text does its best to sell the game, especially mentioning the different times that the different close-up scenes occur. As far as the actual case is concerned, the clamshell is in decent shape, with the front cover having a few marks on it, like one right there, and a couple right there, and then one up here. And then the rear has a few scratches on it. I'm not sure you could really pick them up on the video or not. They're pretty light. One little mark right there, though. But that's it. The hang tab at the top is intact. And the inner cover has no visible damage, which is really nice. Opening the clamshell, the cartridge and manual both look to be in good shape. A little bit of wear on the top of the cartridge there. I don't know what's up with that, but it's hardly noticeable. You gotta look very closely to see it. And then, like I said, the manual's in pretty good shape as well. Minus a little bit of bending at the bottom, but that's pretty good for an almost 30-year-old manual. As far as the manual goes, it's basic and does the job. It explains all the options and modes available to the player, and has a few screenshots in it to illustrate things, like one up there, and then a few here. Like this one shows sort of the stats screen when you call timeout. And speaking of illustrating, the previous owner of this game decided it'd be a good idea to color in the colors of the team. So the New York team was blue, the Seattle team was green, Los Angeles team was red for whatever reason, and so on and so forth. I guess it's nice to know, but you definitely shouldn't be choosing which team to play based on the color. Thankfully, the marker didn't bleed through too badly and cause issues with reading anything really important. At the end of the manual, though, is one of Sega's high score logs that they were so famous for having back in the day. But what would you even write down? Your team's score? The score of both teams? I don't know, probably shouldn't even have this in here, or certainly at least not formatted like this. But it might have been to force a habit for them at the time with Sega's heavy arcade-style background to their early approach on the Genesis. And that's what you get with Pat Riley Basketball. Now let's move on to the game itself and see why I mentioned previously that the game is reminiscent of Basketball Nightmare.
One of the things I love about this channel is revisiting games I've played in the past, even bad ones, or checking out games I wasn't able to back in the 80s and 90s, either simply because I never had a chance to, or in the case of these European exclusives, not even knowing they existed. Well, I had played Pat Riley Basketball back in the 90s, and I vaguely remembered certain details about it. I certainly had never played or even heard of another game, Basketball Nightmare, until about 6 months ago. Basketball Nightmare was the first European Master System title that I bought that wasn't also released in the United States. And I just picked it up on a lark because it looked interesting and it was available relatively inexpensively. And since I'm starting the process of reviewing these games before actually owning all of them, it was actually pretty fortuitous that I purchased and reviewed it before working on Pat Riley Basketball. Now, before I go any further, anyone that knows Basketball Nightmare, or has watched my video on it, knows that it's a vastly different game, so you can't call Pat Riley a sequel to it. But it does have one major element that is similar that I feel has to be brought up, and that's the action cinema sequences. While cinema sequences in a sports title isn't certainly unique to either of these games, as Tecmo had previously been doing it with their NES titles like Bad News Baseball and Tecmo Bowl, the scenes in Basketball Nightmare were different, as they actually replaced live gameplay for dunks.
the designers of Pat Riley Basketball took this design and went a step further with it. Now in dunk scenarios, you have a bar with a moving dot to represent timing, and you must stop the dot in the correct zone to make your dunk. Your dunk scene will change depending on where around the basket your player jumps from, which makes sense. And now also, defenders can play spoiler if they're in the area, also having a bar and dot, potentially dot block the dunk. The dunk scenes are cool at first, and with the colorful animation and huge player sprites, I'm sure looked absolutely awesome in 1990. Along with the dunk scenes, there are also similar scenes involving free throws that use a similar moving dot scenario to line up your shot, and are complicated by the dot not always moving at the same speed. However, these scenes are pretty rare, as fouls in the game are not common. In the first 3 games I played to refamiliarize myself with the game, I only triggered free throws once. Finally, there are also scenes for 3-pointers, but the 3-pointer scenes are non-interactive and simply play after a 3-pointer is taken, showing the shot itself based on where the ball was shot from, and then if the shot was made or missed. So, with all that, as you can imagine, Pat Riley Basketball is definitely an arcade-styled basketball game, and not a sim. Remember a minute ago when I said that the dunk scenes are cool at first? Well, there's a reason for that. Dunk scenes trigger anytime you're in the paint with a ball and you go for a shot, and your likelihood for making a dunk is incredibly high no matter the player's shoot rating. We'll get to ratings in a minute. So any good player will simply attempt to dunk the ball every time down the court, as any other shot is considerably more risky, and shooting 3-pointers, even with a player with a good shot rating, is risky at best and an absolute disaster at worst. First 2 games I played, I chose the Los Angeles team, which definitely does not represent the Lakers, and I didn't make a single 3-point shot that was attempted, and it took me switching to Seattle to get closer to the 30 to 40% range. As you can imagine, if you're dunking every play down the court, and more than likely seeing the same animation each time, unless you choose to dunk from beside the basket or underneath, it's going to get pretty boring. The closest claim Pat Riley Basketball can make to having simulation aspects are the ratings of the individual players, the ability to change the player's location based on those stats, or I guess random desires, and the stat keeping on those players in regards to their shot attempts and points scored throughout the game. And to an extent, it does seem that those characteristics do make a difference. The most noticeable one is speed. Use a player that has a 9 in speed versus a 5, and the 9 will zoom across the court in comparison. However, there's one huge problem with this implementation, and that's the fact that there are 2 player sprites in the game. A black player, and a blonde white player. Although, through some glitching, I seemed to uncover a 3rd uncommon dark-haired white player. With all the sprites looking the same, and no difference in height or numbers on the jerseys or any other kind of indication of who's who, it becomes impossible to tell which white guy or which black guy has the ball, and the stats more or less become irrelevant. I mean, I suppose if you're playing Seattle, which I did for the video, and one of the white players has a 9 in speed, it's pretty easy to tell which player is who based on who has the ball. But most of the time, this isn't going to be the case. And now to segue into the next topic, passing. Passing is pretty important in most basketball games, as it is in the real-life game, and Pat Riley is no exception. As you move up the court with the ball, you're always in danger of having the ball stripped. Always. Even if the defender is behind you, in a situation where it normally should be impossible to lose possession without being fouled. The almost complete lack of personal fouls in the game, combined with the computer's rubber band AI, makes the likelihood of you losing possession of the ball before shooting it as you bring it up the court very high. It makes passing to an open player when moving the ball up paramount to keeping up with the computer from a scoring perspective. However, there's just one problem with that, and it's actually a very similar problem to what Basketball Nightmare had. There are often times when attempting to pass the ball up the court that the player simply won't pass the ball, even if you're pressing the controller in the general direction of another player on your team while pressing the pass button. I have no idea what causes it, and there's no marking showing you who you would be passing the ball to before it occurs. The only marking is just a triangle over the player that you have controlling the ball's head. And it's incredibly frustrating 5 to 10 times a game the ball will get stolen from you because you can't get it out of your hands even though you've hit the pass button a few times. And Lord help you if there's a computer player between you and the person you're trying to pass it to, because the computer will intercept it. One last issue with passing is how it utilizes the C button. The C button is also used for steal attempts on defense, and oftentimes if you execute a successful steal while some of your players are still running up the court, the computer will take your press of the C button as a request to pass the ball, and pass the ball to the player that's still in the backcourt, causing a violation. Sometimes you can't tell exactly when you've stolen the ball, so this can be a common frustrating occurrence. It would have made more sense to move the various player functions around to other buttons, so that these two weren't both on the same button. But I guess Sega didn't feel that way. This is made even worse by the fact that the A button is essentially not even used in the game, only being utilized to call timeouts. But let's move on. I think we've dissected the gameplay in a relatively simple game enough. Graphically, the game isn't anything special other than the cutscenes, and I've already mentioned how frustrating the lack of diversity in the player sprites is, and how it causes problems during gameplay. All teams play on the same court, whether in exhibition mode or in tournament mode, and the only distinction between your players is the color of their jersey. But hey, there's a neat unskippable halftime show with your cheerleaders, so that's good, right? Yeah. Well, there's no slowdown or flickering in the game, which is nice, but ultimately, it's an early Genesis game that looks like an early Genesis game. The music and sound effects in the game aren't anything to write home about either. Surprise, surprise. Actually, to be honest, I didn't mind the in-game music much, as the few tracks available for in-game play are actually decent music and have nice, clean-sounding synths. But you're going to get the same track for the entire half, so I hope you like the music a lot. The sound effects, on the other hand, don't seem like we're given nearly as much focus on effort. The swishes and clangs of made shots versus missed shots are fine, but the crowd noise in the game, ugh. The crowd noise sounds like a lawnmower running in low gear, just a low thud 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 sound. Thankfully, it's not constant. However, since it plays after every dunk, you're going to hear it a good bit. Overall, Pat Riley Basketball is an interesting early Genesis title that showcases Sega's arcade gameplay to home console mentality. But I must remind you that when I say interesting, I don't necessarily mean good. There's lots of things that could have been done better here, and in many ways, this title still feels like it's designed with 8-bit trappings. And seeing how much better Lakers vs. Celtics came off, it's pretty clear that even in the early days of the console, it was capable of so much more. I'm giving Pat Riley Basketball 2 stars out of 5, as while the Tecmo-esque cutscenes on shots are nice, especially with the interactive elements some of them have, from a gameplay perspective, they're just much better titles on a console. And for most people, it's going to be relegated to just being a footnote of what was the first example of virtual basketball to appear on the Genesis.
Okay, there you go. Pat Riley Basketball, or Super Real Basketball if you're not in the United States. A game that had potential and might have been interesting if it got a sequel, but Sega chose not to pursue the license and instead started over from scratch with, at the time, current sensation David Robinson. Did Sega get all the kinks worked out in David Robinson's Supreme Court? Well, that's a question for another time, but I do remember liking it better than Pat Riley Basketball. We'll just have to take a closer look down the road and see if these 30-year memories hold up. Tune in next week when we go back to the Sega CD and take to the air with a game that actually will be a completely new experience for me this week. Hopefully it's a good one. Remember, whatever you play, have fun and be excellent to each other. Later.